From today on, make the rest of your life the best of your life. 1917, Trading with the Enemy Act amended in 1933 to include U.S. citizens as enemies of the state. 91 years ago today, President Franklin D. Roosevelt pulled off the greatest heist in American history. Unlike most robberies, this one was entirely legal. No safe cracking was required. No ski masks, guns, or getaway cars. Just a pen and some White House letterhead. On April 5, 1933, FDR issued Executive Order 6102, making it illegal for anyone in the United States to own gold, by penalty of up to a $10,000 fine or 10 years in prison. Everyone in the country was ordered to turn in their gold to the government by the end of the month. EO 6102 is one of the most important milestones in the history of money, bookended by the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913 and the end of the Bretton Woods system in 1971. It was a pivotal part of the process by which the USA abandoned gold for a fiat standard. As such, it's a milestone in Bitcoin history too. Though Bitcoiners' interest in EO 6102 extends beyond the merely historical, because it's the quintessential cautionary tale of arbitrary government seizure of personal property. It's also one of the best real case studies to illustrate the value of Bitcoin self-custody. Realizing that the government is not your friend is like learning that Santa Claus isn't real, a necessary part of growing up, but a potentially traumatic fact that needs to be introduced to children carefully. Nonetheless, adulthood requires coming to grips with the fact that no jolly fat man is coming down the chimney with gifts in hand. In the real world, the strange fat man wears a frown and comes through your front door with an arrest warrant if you don't pay your taxes. For many people, the story of Executive Order 6102 brings them into collision with this reality. It teaches us that the United States government has not hesitated to brazenly confiscate its citizens' wealth through the barrel of a gun, and under the right circumstances would do it again. However, most discussion of 6102 focuses on why FDR did it and whether it was justified. This debate is framed around FDR's overall handling of the Great Depression. On one side, you have essentially FDR's hagiography, which says that he was an unmitigated American hero, and that without his New Deal, we would all have been lost. On the other side, you have the somewhat milquetoast Republican criticism, which says, well, maybe FDR went too far, or maybe he hurt the economy as much as he helped it. Sometimes the spicy libertarian will get hot under the collar and tell you FDR sent America down the path to welfare statism and accustomed Americans to the pernicious dole. All of this misses the most important lesson from EO 6102, which is how FDR pulled the whole thing off. I mean, technically, legally. This is because, even though FDR's presidency could justifiably be characterized as a quasi-dictatorship, and in the words of America's foremost FDR disrespecter Curtis Yarvin, a commencius moldbug, ruled by personal decree 4, there were specific legal precedents and tools of executive power that he relied on to make EO 6102 kosher. This legality, fig leaf for tyranny as it may have been, is crucially important to understand. It was one of the foundational steps in codifying what would go on to become a technique for abusing Americans' rights favored by almost every president and has been implemented dozens of times in the decades since. If we have any hope of putting a stop to it, we must first learn to see it from a distance, and then stomp it out preemptively. The use and abuse of this act. Now, in a well-ordered republic, it should never be necessary to resort to extra constitutional measures, for although they may for the time be beneficial, yet the precedent is pernicious. For if the practice is once established of disregarding the laws for good objects, they will in a little while be disregarded under that pretext for evil purposes. Machiavelli, The Prince and the Discourses. I'm not sure anyone's ever said that the conduct of American presidents has on the whole not been Machiavellian enough. But in this case, the historical record is clear. Dating back at least to Abraham Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus in 1862, so he could lock people up without trial during the Civil War. Disregarding the laws for good objects has been practically a job requirement of the Oval Office. Carl Schmitt said, "Sovereign is he who decides on the exception." Every U.S. president since Lincoln has made sure, when necessary, to create and exploit extra constitutional exceptions for their ends. In Schmitt's case, well, you can Google him to see how he put the principle into practice. To manufacture these exceptions in America, Presidents have almost always resorted to the incantation of a particular phrase, which reliably summons the special powers they seek, much like coaxing a genie from a lamp. The phrase is national emergency. Likely, it is familiar to you. If you're an American adult, it's been invoked in your lifetime to help grease the skids for a colorful variety of constitutionally suspect legislation. From the anti-terrorism provisions of the Patriot Act to the public health emergency measures of COVID-19. It's such a mainstay of the government toolkit that the use of the national emergency has been officially sanctioned since the 1976 National Emergencies Act. Since that date, 82 such emergencies have been declared, and 42 are still in effect today. To give you a sense of the temporal nature of these emergencies, there are still in effect 9 from the Obama administration, 10 from Bush I, 5 from Clinton, and even 1 from Jimmy Carter in 1979. This is what Milton Friedman was talking about when he said, "Nothing is so permanent as a temporary government program." This is also the story of Executive Order 6102, for it too sprouted from an official national emergency. You can read this in order itself, where FDR states in the preamble, "I, Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the United States of America, do declare that said national emergency continues to exist." Executive Order 6102, 5 April 1933. But still, the story goes deeper. It's not just enough to declare a national emergency and then do whatever you want. That certainly wasn't the case in 1933. So what was FDR's national emergency? What on earth could legally justify the seizure of all American gold? The short answer is the Great Depression and looming financial crisis in 1933. But to understand the twisted history of national emergencies, we have to go back another 120 years first. Since March 9, 1933, the United States has been in a state of declared national emergency. There are now in effect 4 presidentially proclaimed states of national emergency. In addition to the national emergency declared by President Roosevelt in 1933, there is also the national emergency proclaimed by President Truman on December 16, 1950, during the Korean conflict, and the states of national emergency declared by President Nixon on March 23, 1970, and August 15, 1971. 2DEA was enacted on October 6, 1917, and on October 22, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson, by Executive Order 2729, created the Office of Alien Property Custodian under TWA with power to confiscate property from anyone whose actions might be considered a possible threat to the war effort. Initially, the custodian confiscated the property of interned natives of Germany and businesses, such as the Bayer Chemical Company. On December 7, 1917, the United States declared war on the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the other Central Powers. In 1933, newly elected President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Proclamation 2039, which declared a national emergency and imposed a bank holiday. The proclamation cited TWA obliquely reference as the Act of October 6, 1917, as the basis of his authority. Aware that such action was legally dubious, since the United States was not at war, Roosevelt asked Congress to ratify his actions by passing the Emergency Banking Relief Act, which amended TWA to enable its use during any period of national emergency declared by the President. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, using these new authorities, issued Executive Order 6102 to limit gold ownership. These restrictions continued until January 1, 1975. The TWA has been amended several other times. During and after both World Wars, property frozen by the United States, belonging to neutral or allied nations, was returned, and property belonging to enemy nations was continuously confiscated until hostilities ceased. Some of the confiscated enemy property would not be returned later. Agreements to return some or most assets in exchange for seized American assets and reparations for war-damaged American interests by the new governments of the former enemy nations were later concluded. Nations or organizations that were deemed less responsible for starting the wars received much more favorable treatment. The United States instituted the Italian Enemy Act of 1947 to deal with former members of the Mussolini regime from controlling interest in U.S.-based businesses under the TWA Act of 1917. Leave questions in the comments below, and we'll respond. Subscribe to our channel for more helpful videos like this. Thank you for watching, and until we meet again, stay healthy and happy. I'm giving you some news you can use.